I caught my wife red-handed in a hotel they were having. It was the end of our relationship, but I didn't expect her to. The wind whipped through the empty streets as I sat in my car, staring blankly out the windshield. The rain was coming down in heavy sheets, drumming on the roof with a persistent, dull rhythm. My fingers tapped on the steering wheel, though I had no particular beat in mind. It was just something to do, something to distract me from the churning knot in my stomach. I checked my phone again. 9:47 p.m. No missed calls. No messages. Not a single sign that Claire had tried to reach me. I knew where she was. The thought lingered in the back of my mind, a bitter truth I didn't want to face. I could have driven home, pretended like nothing was wrong, and kept living the lie. But I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight was different. This was the night when everything was going to change. I had followed Claire once before, a few weeks back. It was late, much like tonight, and she had left the house without a word. I told myself it was nothing, that I was being paranoid. But something inside me, some gnawing instinct I couldn't ignore, drove me to follow her. I watched as she pulled into a hotel parking lot on the other side of town and met a man I didn't recognize. They exchanged a few words before disappearing inside. I never confronted her about it. I didn't want to believe it, didn't want to accept that the woman I loved, the woman I had built my life around, was lying to me. Instead, I spent the following weeks in a haze of denial, avoiding the subject, convincing myself that there must be some explanation. But deep down, I knew better. And now, here I was again, parked outside the same hotel, waiting for her to make the same mistake. I clenched my jaw and turned off the car, stepping out into the rain. The cold droplets soaked through my jacket almost instantly, but I didn't care. The chill felt good, a sharp reminder that this was real, that everything I was about to do was real. I walked across the parking lot, my footsteps splashing in the puddles as I approached the entrance. The neon sign flickered above me, casting a dim, ghostly light over the wet pavement. Inside, the lobby was eerily quiet. The faint hum of the air conditioner was the only sound as I approached the front desk. The woman behind the counter looked up, barely acknowledging my presence. She was young, probably in her 20s, with dark hair tied back in a ponytail and a bored expression on her face. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice monotone, as though she had asked the same question 1,000 times and expected nothing interesting in return. I hesitated for a moment. My mind was racing, trying to come up with a reason to be here, some plausible excuse for why I needed to know what room Claire was in. But no lie came to mind. "I'm looking for someone," I said finally, my voice rough. "A woman who checked in earlier tonight." "Claire Thompson." The receptionist raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't give out guest information." "Of course not. I should have known better." I rubbed a hand over my face, frustrated, and glanced around the lobby. A pair of elevators sat at the far end of the room, their chrome doors reflecting the dim light. If I couldn't get the information from her, I'd have to find another way. "Look, it's important," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm her husband." The receptionist gave me a long, measured look before sighing. "I'm still not allowed to give out information," she said, her tone softening just slightly. "But if you're her husband, maybe you should just talk to her?" That was the last thing I wanted to do. Talking to Claire meant confrontation, and confrontation meant opening a wound that I wasn't sure I was ready to deal with. But I had come this far, and there was no turning back now. "Thanks," I muttered, turning away from the desk. I made my way toward the elevators, my heart pounding in my chest. I pressed the button, and the doors slid open with a quiet ding. Stepping inside, I hit the button for the 3rd floor and leaned against the wall, staring at my reflection in the polished metal. I barely recognized myself. My face was pale, drawn tight with exhaustion. Dark circles ringed my eyes, a stark contrast to the man I used to be. There was a time when Claire and I were inseparable, when everything felt easy and right. But that felt like a lifetime ago. Now, all that remained were fragments of the life we had built together, slowly crumbling apart piece by piece. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped out onto the 3rd floor. The hallway stretched out before me, lined with identical doors, each one leading to a different story, a different life. I walked slowly, scanning the numbers until I reached room 317. Her car had been in the lot. She had to be here. My hand hovered over the door, hesitating. What if I was wrong? What if she wasn't here with someone else? What if this was all some terrible misunderstanding? But I knew better. I knocked, the sound echoing down the empty hallway. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, I heard movement inside, a rustling, followed by footsteps. The door creaked open, just a crack, and there she was, Claire. Her eyes widened in shock as she saw me standing there, drenched from the rain. "Matt, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I could ask you the same thing," I replied, my voice cold, harsher than I intended. I pushed the door open fully and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, the curtains drawn tight against the rain outside. Claire stood in front of me, her hair damp and tangled, wearing a robe I didn't recognize. Behind her, a man was sitting on the edge of the bed, his face pale, wide-eyed, and frozen in shock. I didn't know him, but in that moment, it didn't matter. I already knew what was happening here. "Who the hell is this?" I demanded, my voice rising. Claire's face flushed red, her eyes darting between me and the man behind her. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "I asked you a question," I shouted, my anger boiling over. "Who is he, Claire?" The man stood up, holding his hands up defensively. "Look, man, I didn't know. I'm not talking to you," I snapped, cutting him off. My eyes were locked on Claire, waiting for her to say something, anything that would make sense of this. But she didn't. She just stood there, her lips trembling, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Sorry." That was all she had to say? After everything, after all the lies, that was all she could give me? My fists clenched at my sides as I struggled to keep myself under control. I wanted to scream, to tear the room apart, to make them both feel the pain that was coursing through me like wildfire. But instead, I turned and walked out of the room, slamming the door behind me. I stormed down the hallway, my mind racing, my heart pounding in my chest. The world outside felt like a blur, the rain pounding harder against the windows. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do next, but one thing was clear. Nothing would ever be the same again. I stormed out of the hotel, the rain pelting down harder than before. It soaked through my clothes, chilling me to the bone, but I didn't care. My thoughts were spinning wildly, too fast for me to process, like a whirlwind that wouldn't stop. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't reach for it. I already knew it was Claire, no doubt panicking and trying to explain herself. But what could she say now that would change anything? The image of her standing there in front of that man, both of them frozen in shock, was burned into my mind. There was no going back from that. I trudged through the rain toward my car, my shoes sloshing through the puddles. My mind was racing, flipping through all the moments that led up to this. All the late nights Claire said she was working. All the times she claimed to be traveling for her job. Had it all been a lie? How long had she been seeing this guy? And why? By the time I reached my car, my hands were trembling with anger. I yanked open the door and climbed inside, slamming it shut. The silence in the car was suffocating, broken only by the sound of the rain drumming against the roof. I gripped the steering wheel, squeezing it so hard that my knuckles turned white. This was real. Claire had cheated on me. Everything we had, everything we were supposed to be building together, was a lie. A wave of nausea rolled through me as I thought about the wedding we'd been planning for over a year. We were supposed to get married in 5 months. We'd picked the venue, sent out the invitations, even started talking about honeymoon plans. How was I supposed to stand in front of our families, our friends, and promise forever to someone who had betrayed me? The phone buzzed again. This time, I glanced at it. Claire, 3 missed calls, 5 texts. I unlocked my phone, my thumb hovering over her name. I wanted to ignore her. I wanted to throw my phone out the window and drive as far away as possible. But some sick, twisted part of me needed to know what she had to say. I opened her texts, dreading what I might find. "Claire, Matt, please. Please talk to me. Claire, I'm so sorry. I know I messed up. Claire, it's not what you think. Claire, I'll explain everything. Just give me a chance. Claire, please come back. Don't leave like this. I stared at the screen, feeling a sick sense of satisfaction as I read her words. Not what I think. What else could it be? The proof was right in front of me. Claire, standing in a hotel room with another man. The image flashed in my mind again, and the anger roared back to life, fiercer than before. I couldn't talk to her. Not now. I needed space. I needed to get away, to think. If I talked to her, I wasn't sure I could control what I'd say, and I wasn't ready for that. My mind was too clouded with rage and betrayal. Without responding to her texts, I tossed the phone into the passenger seat, started the car, and pulled out of the parking lot. I drove aimlessly through the city, the windshield wipers struggling to keep up with the downpour. The streets were empty, and the glow from the streetlights reflected off the slick pavement, creating an eerie, distorted landscape. I didn't know where I was going. My brain wasn't working rationally. I just needed to keep moving, to outrun the thoughts swirling in my head. But no matter how fast I drove or how far I went, the questions followed me. How long had she been seeing him? Was this the first time, or had there been others? Why hadn't I noticed? Had I been so blind, so naive, that I didn't see what was happening right in front of me? The rain began to ease up as I reached the outskirts of town, but the storm inside me raged on. I found myself pulling into a gas station, the bright neon lights a sharp contrast to the darkness in my head. I parked the car, cut the engine, and just sat there, staring out at the rain-soaked pavement. My phone buzzed again, but I ignored it. I couldn't face Claire, not now, not yet. As I sat there, staring blankly into the night, I realized that I had no idea what I was supposed to do next. What do you do when your entire world falls apart? How do you pick up the pieces when the person you trusted the most has shattered everything? I rested my head on the steering wheel, letting out a long, shaky breath. I had to figure this out. I couldn't just drive aimlessly through the night, avoiding reality. I had to confront her. After a few minutes, I pulled out my phone and opened my contacts. My thumb hovered over Claire's name, but I couldn't bring myself to call her. Instead, I scrolled past her name and dialed the only other person I could think of. The phone rang twice before a groggy voice answered. Matt? It's almost midnight. What's going on? It was Josh, my best friend since college. If anyone could help me make sense of this, it was him. Josh, I need to talk to someone, I said, my voice strained. Something happened. Something bad. The concern in his voice was immediate. What's wrong, man? Are you okay? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. It's Claire. I found out she's been seeing someone else. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Josh's voice dropped to a low, serious tone. Shit, Matt. Are you sure? How did you find out? I saw her, Josh. I saw her with him, at a hotel. My voice cracked as I spoke the words out loud. Saying it made it feel even more real, like I was finally admitting the truth to myself. Josh let out a slow breath. Damn. I'm so sorry, man. I don't even know what to say. I don't either, I replied, my voice hollow. I don't know what to do. Do you want to come over? I can meet you somewhere. You shouldn't be alone right now. I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. I don't know. I'm just driving. I don't know where I'm going. I can't face her. Not yet. Take your time, Josh said gently. But don't do anything stupid, okay? You're hurting right now, and I get it. But whatever you do next, make sure you're thinking clearly. I know, I muttered. I don't know if I can ever forgive her, Josh. How do I even start? I don't have the answers, man. But I do know one thing. You need to talk to her. You can't just run from this. You deserve answers, and she owes you an explanation. I clenched my jaw, gripping the steering wheel tighter. I don't even know if I want to hear her excuses. It's not about what you want to hear, Josh replied. It's about what you need to know. You need closure, man. You need to understand why she did this. I sat there in silence, my mind whirling with conflicting thoughts. Josh was right. I couldn't just drive around forever, avoiding the truth. I had to confront her, no matter how painful it was. Yeah, I finally said, my voice quiet. You're right. Listen, If you want me to come with you, I will, Josh offered. I'll back you up, no matter what you decide to do. Thanks, I said, feeling a small surge of gratitude for having a friend like him. But I need to do this on my own. I don't know when I'll be ready. Take your time, Josh repeated. But don't wait too long. The longer you let this sit, the harder it'll be to deal with. You've got to face it sooner or later. I know, I said. I'll figure it out. Thanks for picking up. Anytime, man. Call me if you need anything. And Matt, I'm really sorry you're going through this. Yeah, I muttered. Me too. I hung up the phone and stared out at the dark, empty gas station. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle, and the streets were quiet, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for me to make my next move. I knew what I had to do, but that didn't make it any easier. After sitting there for a few more minutes, I finally started the car and headed home. It was almost 1 a.m. by the time I pulled into the driveway, and the house was dark. Claire's car was parked in its usual spot, but I didn't feel the familiar sense of comfort that I usually did when I came home. Instead, the house felt like a stranger's, cold and unfamiliar. I walked up to the front door and paused, my hand resting on the doorknob. I wasn't ready to face her yet. Not tonight. I needed time to process everything, to figure out what I was going to say, what I was going to do. Instead of going inside, I turned and walked around the side of the house, toward the backyard. The rain had finally stopped, and the air was cool and fresh. I sat down on the porch steps, staring up at the cloudy sky. I didn't know how long I sat there, lost in thought, but eventually, the exhaustion caught up to me. My mind, still racing with anger and confusion, finally began to slow. I leaned back against the steps, my eyelids growing heavy. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew I couldn't avoid this forever. Eventually, I'd have to go inside, face Claire, and demand the truth. But for now, I just wanted a few more minutes of peace. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, the sky was beginning to lighten. Dawn was creeping in, casting a pale glow over the backyard. The cold air had seeped into my bones, and my body felt stiff from sitting on the porch steps all night. I rubbed my face, groggy and disoriented, as the events of the previous night came crashing back into my mind. Claire, the hotel, the man. For a few blissful moments, I had forgotten about it. But now it was all there, sharp and vivid, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't escape. I sat there, staring at the patch of grass in front of me, trying to summon the strength to go inside, to confront her. I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to face the reality of what had happened, but I knew I couldn't hide out here forever. I had to go in, had to talk to her, even if I wasn't sure I was ready for the answers I was about to get. With a deep breath, I stood up and stretched, my joints aching from the cold. The house was silent as I walked around to the front, slipping the key into the lock and turning the knob. I stepped inside, the door creaking softly behind me. The kitchen light was on, a faint glow spilling out into the hallway. She was awake. I paused for a moment, listening. No sounds of movement, no footsteps, just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock on the wall. I walked slowly into the kitchen, my heart pounding in my chest. There she was, sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she was still wearing the same robe she had worn at the hotel. She looked up when I entered, her eyes red and puffy, as if she hadn't slept either. "Matt," she said softly, her voice cracking. I didn't respond right away. I just stood there, taking in the scene, the heaviness of the moment pressing down on me. She was waiting for me to say something, but I didn't know where to start. My mind was still reeling, still trying to process everything. Finally, I spoke, my voice cold and quiet. "How long?" Claire blinked, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What? How long have you been seeing him?" I repeated, my voice sharper this time. "I want the truth, Claire. No more lies." She looked down at her mug, her fingers trembling as she gripped it tighter. "Matt, I didn't mean for it to happen." "That's not what I asked," I snapped, cutting her off. "I don't care about your excuses. I just want to know how long you've been lying to me." Her lips trembled as she opened her mouth, but the words seemed to catch in her throat. She swallowed hard, her eyes glistening with tears. 3 months. 3 months. The same number Liam had said. The anger surged inside me again, but I fought to keep my voice steady. 3 months, I repeated, my heart pounding in my chest. And how long were you going to keep it from me? Were you planning on telling me, or were you just hoping I'd never find out? Claire looked up at me, her eyes wide with guilt and fear. I don't know, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I wasn't thinking. I didn't want to hurt you. Well, congratulations, I said bitterly. You did a fantastic job. She winced at the harshness in my tone, her hands trembling as she set the mug down on the table. Matt, I'm so sorry. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But it's over. I ended it. I swear. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. She was saying all the right things, all the things I had expected to hear. But they felt hollow, like empty words. How could I trust her? How could I believe anything she said now? You ended it? I scoffed, shaking my head. And I'm supposed to believe that? After everything? I'm telling the truth, she said, her voice pleading. Last night, that was it. I was going to tell you. I couldn't keep living like this. Tell me what, exactly? I shot back, my voice rising. That you've been sneaking around behind my back for months? That the woman I thought I knew has been lying to my face every single day? Do you have any idea what that feels like, Claire? Tears streamed down her cheeks as she stared at me, her expression one of raw pain. I do. I know I hurt you, and I hate myself for it. But please, Matt, just let me explain. I let out a bitter laugh, the sound harsh and grating in the quiet kitchen. Explain? What's left to explain? I saw you, Claire. I saw you with him. You can't explain that away. She wiped at her tears, her hands shaking. I never meant for this to happen, she said, her voice breaking. I was lonely. We've been so distant lately, and I felt like I was losing you. I know that's no excuse, but I made a mistake. I'm so sorry. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. She felt like she was losing me? That was her reason? I stared at her, incredulous, the anger boiling inside me. You were lonely? I repeated, my voice trembling with fury. So that's your justification for cheating on me? For betraying me? I didn't plan this, she cried, her voice desperate. It just happened. I wasn't thinking. No, you weren't thinking, I interrupted, my voice shaking with barely controlled rage. You weren't thinking about me, about us, about everything we've built together. You were only thinking about yourself. Claire sobbed, burying her face in her hands. I know I was selfish. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to understand. I love you, Matt. I always have. I stared at her, the words swirling in my head. Love? Was this what love looked like? Lies, betrayal, and deception? I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, teetering between heartbreak and rage, not knowing which way I would fall. You love me? I asked, my voice bitter. Is that supposed to mean something now? She looked up at me, her tear-streaked face full of anguish. It means everything. I know I've lost your trust, but I want to fix this. I want to make things right. Fix this, I said, my voice cold. Claire, how do you expect to fix this? You can't just undo what you've done. She shook her head, her hands reaching out toward me. I know I can't, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Counseling, therapy, whatever you want. Just please, don't walk away from us. I stepped back, her words echoing in my mind. Part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that we could somehow fix this, that we could go back to the way things were before. But the other part of me, the part that was still burning with anger and betrayal, couldn't see a way forward. How could I trust her again? How could I ever look at her without remembering what she had done? The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Claire was waiting for me to say something, anything, but I didn't have the words. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her. I need time, I finally said, my voice flat. Claire nodded, her tears still falling. I understand, she whispered. Take all the time you need. Just please don't give up on us. I didn't respond. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, the sound of her quiet sobs following me as I made my way down the hall. I went upstairs to the guest room, the room that had once been meant for visitors, but now felt like a refuge from the life I had shared with her. I shut the door behind me and leaned against it, the weight of everything crashing down on me. How had we gotten here? How had the life we'd built together fallen apart so quickly, so completely? I sank onto the bed, my head in my hands. I had no idea what to do next. I had no idea if I even wanted to try to salvage what was left of our relationship. All I knew was that I felt broken, shattered into pieces by the person I had trusted most in the world. Later that evening, I found myself sitting in the same spot on the bed, staring at the wall, when there was a knock on the door. My body tensed. It had been hours since I'd left Claire crying in the kitchen, and now, I wasn't sure if I had the strength to face her again. I didn't answer, but the door creaked open slowly, and Claire stepped inside. She looked even more fragile now than she had earlier, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She stood there, clutching the doorframe like she needed it to hold her up. "Matt, can we talk?" she asked, her voice hoarse. I didn't respond immediately. I didn't know if I had the energy to go through it all again. But then, I sighed and nodded. "Yeah." She stepped inside, closing the door behind her, and sat down on the edge of the bed, leaving a few feet between us. She stared at her hands, twisting her fingers together nervously. "I've been thinking about everything," she said quietly, "about what I did and what I've put you through. And I know that I don't deserve your forgiveness." I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "I've been selfish," she said, her voice trembling. "I've been thinking about what I need, what I want, without thinking about how it would hurt you. And now, I see it. I see what I've done to you, and I hate myself for it." Her words hung in the air, raw and full of regret. For the first time, it felt like she wasn't just apologizing because she got caught. She was acknowledging the depth of her betrayal, the real consequences of what she had done. "I don't know if I can ever make this right," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks again. "But I want to try. I want to be the person you fell in love with again. The person who would never hurt you like this." My throat tightened as I listened to her. I could hear the sincerity in her voice, but the damage had been done. The wound was still fresh, still bleeding, and I wasn't sure if time would ever heal it. "I don't know, Claire," I said quietly. "I don't know if we can come back from this." She looked up at me, her eyes full of desperation. "Please, Matt, don't walk away from us. I'll do anything." "It's not that simple," I interrupted, my voice harsher than I intended. "It's not just about saying you're sorry and promising to change. You broke something, Claire. You broke me. And I don't know if I can ever trust you again." The words hung heavy in the room, thick with finality. Claire sobbed, covering her face with her hands as she crumbled under the weight of my rejection. For the first time, I realized that this wasn't just the end of our relationship. It was the end of everything we'd built together. The life we had planned, the future we had envisioned, was gone, and there was nothing left to say. I stayed in the guest room for the next few days. The house was a tomb, filled with the suffocating weight of everything that had been said. Claire and I hardly spoke, existing in the same space but as distant as two strangers. The only sounds were the occasional clinking of dishes or the hum of the heater, but even those were drowned out by the silence between us. I was waiting for clarity, hoping that somehow the pain would dull and I'd know what to do. But each morning, I woke up feeling even more lost than the day before. Claire had stopped trying to talk to me after that last conversation. The sadness in her eyes whenever she passed me in the hallway was unbearable, but I couldn't face her. I wasn't ready. I didn't know if I'd ever be. It was on the 5th day that I finally decided I needed to leave. It wasn't fair to either of us to keep dragging this out. I had been staying in the guest room, avoiding her, but it was time for me to go, for both our sakes. The marriage we had built, the future we had imagined together, was over. I packed my bag in silence, the zipper's metallic hum somehow louder than anything else in the room. As I zipped the final compartment, Claire appeared in the doorway, her expression calm but her eyes red and swollen. She had been crying again. "You're leaving," she said softly. It wasn't a question, more of an observation. I couldn't look her in the eyes. I picked up my bag, slinging it over my shoulder. Yeah, I think it's for the best. Claire nodded, biting her lip. Where will you go? I'm not sure yet. Maybe stay with Josh for a bit until I figure things out. I cleared my throat, trying to maintain my composure. She hesitated, leaning against the door frame, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her sweater. Matt, please don't shut me out like this. We need to talk. We need to, I don't know, figure out what's next. I shook my head. What's next? Claire, there is no next for us. I can't do this. You made your choice, and this is the result. Her eyes filled with tears again, and she let out a shaky breath. It doesn't have to be this way. I'm willing to do anything. I'll prove to you that I can change, that I can be better for us. We can go to counseling. We can start over. Start over? I interrupted, my voice rising with disbelief. How do we start over from this, Claire? You've been lying to me for months. You've betrayed me in the worst possible way. There's no reset button for that. I love you, Matt, she whispered, her voice breaking. I made a terrible mistake, but I never stopped loving you. I clenched my jaw, feeling the familiar surge of pain and anger rise in my chest. You don't do what you did to someone you love. Her face crumpled at my words, and I could see her spirit breaking in front of me. But I didn't have it in me to comfort her. I couldn't. I pushed past her and walked down the hall toward the front door. Each step felt like I was walking through quicksand, dragging the weight of everything we'd been through behind me. When I reached the door, I stopped, my hand resting on the handle. Goodbye, Claire, I said softly without turning around. There was a long, deafening silence before I heard her whisper, goodbye. I opened the door and stepped outside, the cold air hitting me like a slap in the face. I didn't look back. Josh opened the door to his apartment, his expression concerned but relieved to see me. Hey man, you look like you haven't slept in days. I forced a tired smile. Feels like I haven't. He stepped aside, letting me in. The familiar smell of takeout and beer hit me as I walked inside, and for the first time in what felt like weeks, I let out a breath. Josh's place was messy, cluttered with old pizza boxes and crumpled beer cans, but it felt like a sanctuary compared to the cold, sterile silence of the house I had just left. I dropped my bag on the floor and sank onto the couch, rubbing my face with my hands. The exhaustion was catching up to me, pulling me down like a heavy blanket. Josh handed me a beer and sat down across from me, his eyes scanning my face. So, it's done, he asked carefully. I nodded, taking a long swig of the beer. Yeah, I left. Josh sighed, leaning back in his chair. I'm sorry, man. I can't imagine what you're going through. I didn't respond, just stared at the bottle in my hand, my thoughts swirling in a chaotic mess. It was surreal, sitting here with Josh, while the life I'd known was disintegrating into ashes. How was I supposed to move forward from this? How do you rebuild when the foundation of your life has crumbled? Josh didn't push me to talk. He knew me well enough to understand that I needed time. We sat there in silence for a while, the sound of the TV playing in the background, though neither of us was watching. Eventually, I spoke. I feel like I don't even know who I am anymore. Josh didn't say anything right away, just nodded, letting my words sink in. I spent so long building this life with Claire, making plans, thinking we were solid. And now, it's like everything I thought was real wasn't. I feel like an idiot. You're not an idiot, Josh said firmly. She screwed up, man. This isn't on you. Isn't it? I said bitterly. I ignored the signs, Josh. I let myself believe that everything was fine, even when I knew something was off. Josh leaned forward, his expression serious. Dude, you trusted her. That's not a fault. That's what people do in relationships. You can't blame yourself for this. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. It's just, I don't know where to go from here. You take it one day at a time, Josh said quietly. There's no magic fix for this. It's going to suck for a while, but you'll get through it. And if you need anything, you've got me. You're not alone in this. I nodded, grateful for his support, but the gnawing emptiness in my chest remained. No matter how many times I told myself it wasn't my fault, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had failed. failed to see the truth, failed to protect myself from this heartbreak. Weeks passed. I stayed at Josh's apartment, crashing on his couch while I figured out my next steps. Claire had tried calling me a few times, but I never answered. I wasn't ready to face her again. Not yet. Maybe not ever. One cold Friday evening, I got a text from her. It was the first message in days, and for a moment, I thought about ignoring it like all the others. But something in me told me to read it. Claire asterisk asterisk, I know you don't want to talk, and I understand. But I need to see you, Matt. Please, just one more time. I need to tell you something. Asterisk. I stared at the message, a heavy pit forming in my stomach. What could she possibly need to tell me now? Wasn't everything already out in the open? My gut told me to ignore it, but another part of me, the part that still needed closure, made me text back. Me asterisk, what is it? Her response was immediate. Claire asterisk asterisk, can you come to the house tonight? I'll explain everything then. Asterisk. I hesitated, my heart pounding. Did I really want to do this? Did I want to open that wound again? Or should I just move on? But the nagging curiosity wouldn't leave me alone. I needed to know what else she could possibly have to say. Me asterisk asterisk, fine. I'll be there in an hour. Asterisk. I told Josh I was heading out and drove through the dark streets, my mind racing. What could Claire possibly need to tell me now? It wasn't until I pulled into the driveway of the house that I realized how much anxiety had been building up inside me. My hands were shaking as I cut the engine and stepped out of the car. The house looked the same, cold, dark, and unfamiliar, despite the years we'd spent making it a home. I walked to the front door, hesitated for a moment, then knocked. I could hear footsteps inside, soft and hesitant, and a moment later, the door opened. Claire stood there, her face pale and drawn, her eyes red and hollow. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Matt, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Thank you for coming. I didn't respond, just nodded, stepping inside. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. Claire led me to the living room, where we both sat down on opposite ends of the couch. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was suffocating, the weight of everything that had happened hanging between us like a dark cloud. Finally, Claire broke the silence. There's something I need to tell you, she said softly, her voice trembling. I clenched my fists, trying to stay calm. What is it? She hesitated, biting her lip as she looked down at her hands. It's about the man I was seeing. I felt a cold wave of anger surge through me, but I bit it back. I don't want to hear about him, Claire. No, you need to hear this, she said quickly, her voice urgent. He wasn't just some guy. He's dangerous, Matt. My heart skipped a beat, confusion swirling in my mind. What do you mean, dangerous? Claire's hands were trembling as she spoke. I didn't know at first, but he's involved in some bad things. Illegal things. I found out too late, and now she stopped, her breath hitching as fresh tears filled her eyes. I stared at her, my mind racing. What are you talking about? He's been following me, Matt, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ever since I ended things with him, he's been watching me. I think he knows that you found out. I'm scared. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to close in around me, my thoughts spiraling out of control. Was this real? Could Claire have gotten involved with someone dangerous? Someone who might be stalking her? The shock hadn't fully set in when I heard a noise outside. It was faint, like a soft scraping sound, but it sent a chill down my spine. I stood up, my body tense, as Claire's eyes widened in fear. Did you hear that? I asked, my voice tight. She nodded, her face pale. He's here. Without thinking, I rushed to the front door, my heart pounding in my chest. I threw it open, stepping out into the cold night air. My eyes scanned the driveway, the street, but it was empty. But then I heard it, a low, gravelly voice from behind me. Looking for me? I spun around, and there he was, the man from the hotel. He was standing at the end of the driveway, his hands shoved into the pockets of his leather jacket, a smirk on his face. Claire told me about you, he said, his voice mocking. Guess you didn't take the news so well? My blood ran cold. This was the man Claire had been involved with, the man who had destroyed my life. And now, he was standing in front of me. "I think it's time we had a little chat, don't you?" he said, stepping closer. I clenched my fists, my heart racing. Whatever was about to happen, I knew it wouldn't end well. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating. He was tall, muscular, with an aura of confidence that told me he was used to intimidating people. But I wasn't backing down. Not tonight. Not after everything. My fists clenched at my sides, the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears as I stared him down. He took a slow step forward, his smirk fading into something colder, more dangerous. "Didn't think you'd actually come outside," he sneered, his voice low and taunting. "But I guess I shouldn't be surprised. You look like the kind of guy who's all bark and no bite." I didn't respond. Words wouldn't matter here. My muscles tensed as I prepared for what I knew was coming. "You should have stayed out of it," he continued, his hand slipping into his jacket. "Claire was having fun before you ruined it. Now, I'm gonna have to teach you a lesson." Without warning, he pulled out a knife. The blade glinted in the dim light, sharp and deadly. My stomach dropped, but I kept my stance firm. Fear clawed at me, but I pushed it aside. I wasn't about to let this man intimidate me, not after everything he'd put me through. I heard the front door creak open behind me. Claire. I could feel her presence before I saw her, and I could sense the fear radiating from her as she stood frozen on the porch. "Matt, no," Claire shouted, her voice full of panic. "Stay inside." I barked, keeping my eyes locked on the man in front of me. "I can handle this." The man laughed, twirling the knife in his hand. "You think you can handle me, hero? Let's see what you've got." He lunged at me without warning, the knife slashing through the air. I barely dodged, the blade missing me by inches as I sidestepped, my heart racing. I swung my fist, connecting with his jaw in a satisfying crunch, but he barely flinched. He was stronger than I expected. We circled each other, our eyes locked in a deadly dance. He lunged again, this time faster, and I ducked just in time. My knuckles grazed his ribs in a quick jab, but it wasn't enough to slow him down. He grunted, more irritated than hurt, and retaliated with a wild swing of the knife. The sharp edge grazed my arm, slicing through my sleeve. Pain shot through me, but I ignored it. I couldn't afford to be distracted. "You're dead, man," he growled, his eyes wild with anger. "Should have stayed out of it." I threw a punch, aiming for his ribs, but he was too fast. The knife came at me again, and I barely had time to block it with my forearm. Pain seared through my skin as the blade cut deeper this time, but I didn't back down. I swung again, this time hitting him square in the chest. He stumbled back, his eyes flashing with fury. "Matt!" Claire's voice rang out again, closer this time. I glanced over my shoulder just as she bolted down the steps, her eyes wide with terror. "Get back inside," I shouted, but it was too late. She was already running toward me. And that's when everything happened at once. The man lunged again, his knife aimed directly at my chest. I saw the blade coming, but before I could react, Claire threw herself in front of me. "Claire, no." Time seemed to slow down. Her body collided with mine, and I watched in horror as the knife plunged into her side with a sickening thud. The man's eyes widened, shocked by what he had done. As Claire crumpled into my arms, her face contorted with pain. "Claire!" I screamed, my voice raw with panic. Blood poured from the wound, soaking her clothes, staining my hands. The man stepped back, his eyes darting between me and Claire, as if realizing the gravity of what had just happened. Then, without another word, he turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness. But I didn't care about him. All I could see was Claire, lying in my arms, her breathing ragged, her skin pale. Blood was everywhere. "Claire, stay with me," I begged, my voice trembling. "Please, stay with me." Her eyes fluttered, struggling to focus on my face. "Matt," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry. Don't talk. Just hold on," I said, my hands pressing against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "You're going to be okay. I'm calling for help." I fumbled for my phone with trembling hands and dialed 911, my voice shaky as I explained the situation. The seconds stretched into eternity as I waited for the ambulance to arrive, my heart pounding in my chest. I kept talking to her, begging her to stay awake, but her breathing was getting shallower, her eyes losing focus. When the ambulance finally arrived, the paramedics rushed over, pulling her from my arms and loading her into the back. I followed, my heart in my throat, praying that she'd make it. The hospital was a blur of lights, noise, and confusion. I sat in the waiting room, my clothes still stained with her blood, my mind numb with shock. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell. Time had lost all meaning. A doctor eventually emerged, his face grim. "Mr. Harris?" I stood up, my legs unsteady beneath me. "How is she?" "Is she?" The doctor's expression softened, but his eyes were full of sadness. "I'm sorry. We did everything we could, but the wound was too severe. She lost too much blood." The world seemed to tilt, the weight of his words crashing down on me like a tidal wave. Claire was gone. My knees buckled, and I collapsed into the chair, my head in my hands. Everything we had been through, all the pain and betrayal, it didn't matter anymore. She was gone, and nothing could change that. Hours later, I found myself in the hospital morgue. The cold, sterile air pressed in around me as I stood over her body, her face still, peaceful. They had covered her in a white sheet, her skin pale beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. I reached out, my hand trembling, and gently touched her cheek. "I'm so sorry, Claire," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I never wanted it to end like this." Tears filled my eyes, blurring my vision as I stood there, alone in the cold, empty room. The woman I had loved, the woman who had betrayed me and then sacrificed herself to save me, was gone.